Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Station 11 episode 4. It's called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Aren't Dead. That's aren't dead. I might have done this intro like 3 times already and said are dead because that's what you usually say. But this is a sponsored review from Patreon, so thank you to Alison for picking the show and sponsoring these episodes. Episode 4 takes us back to the post-apocalyptic, the 20 years later part of the story with adult Kirsten, and progresses the idea of the Prophet and that he's going to do something possibly bad to the group, maybe in direct retaliation to Kirsten. I mean, I get this feeling that he was going to do it anyway, but more so that like he's specifically toying with her, perhaps because there's a connection to her through the Station 11 book, or some such. But or just retaliation for stabbing him is probably why he specifically threatened her last we saw him. But yeah, I mean, this one, it progresses that stuff. It develops a few more details of this group and the characters, and sets up this idea of Sarah's past. Her ex-husband, I guess we'll call him, turns out to be Tobias Funke from Arrested Development. David Cross shows up. His name's Gil. It turns out that back when he was in the troupe, because he was the director of the plays, the troupe would split into two at a certain part on the map, and the actors would all go to this country club, this golfing country club, and perform for them, while all the musicians in the group would go to a different location. But in the recent years, they've not been doing that, and it's explained to us it's because Tobias, and I'm sorry, I'm going to call him Tobias because it's the first name that comes to mind every time I see him in my head. He moved into the country club with a woman named Catherine, so Sarah does not want to go there and is very kind of, the feelings are a bit sore about it. So that's set up right at the start, but of course we do end up going there. Basically, Kirsten actually kind of tricks her into going there. So she kind of drops this lie that she heard that Catherine might be dead, which makes Sarah want to go to the country club, which is all very amusing. I think, one of the things about this future stuff in this show is that it handles a very different type of tone. And I said this a lot in the episode 2 review, but it's very different from typical stories of this kind. But what's interesting, though, is that by the end of this episode, I feel like something so dark happens that I have a hard time imagining that this tone can still be there when we come back to it. And it may not even be next episode. I'm getting the feeling that next episode might be another sort of standalone, like, focused flashback story, just like the last one was with Miranda. So I think we're going to maybe do something like that in the next time, because that seems to be the cadence of the episodes. But when we come back to these characters in this time frame, it feels like, how can we have the same jokey stuff we did here? The prime example being how lightly they play the whole idea that they're going towards the country club and they've actually got mines out in the field in front of it, and they have to stop, and they're all shit scared that they're going to step in mines. But it's kind of played with a sort of dark sense of humor. There's kind of a few little laughs in there. It turns out that the Prophet had been to the country club and actually stole some of their children, and we'll come back to that. But like, this is mostly still played for kind of a dark humor, light-hearted sequence when it should be kind of terrifying. And I'm not complaining, because for the most part it worked for me. I did think it was a little bit of a cop-out that we just cut to the dinner table at, like, in the very next scene, and all of the characters who were still stranded in the minefield have just gotten away from it. I get that if they're all going to survive, there's no reason to do a big tense sequence where they're all slowly moving and trying not to blow themselves up. But it did feel like a little bit like, okay, all right, you're letting yourself away with that. Obviously, we had Alex running through it because she runs down to Gil, to Tobias, and hugs him. But it felt like everything else was like, it felt like it was maybe like, okay, it's a little bit of a cop out. We just skipped over that threat, if you will. That said, there might be less mines in the field than we expected there to be, because at the end, the children that the Prophet kidnapped, or I say kidnapped, persuaded to follow him might be a better, brainwashing might be a better term even. He sends 2 of them, it seems like, back in to be suicide bombers with these mines strapped to their chest. And the 2 kids like hug Tobias at the end and blow him up. And it's like a really, dark moment. It feels like how can we have a lighthearted tone when we come back to this part of the timeline when two children suicide bombers, not even just any child suicide bombers, like children who were part of this group. I think some of them were the grandkids of some of the characters, and they've just suicide bombed a character they all care about out of existence. It's a big moment. It's kind of a shocking moment. It kind of felt like the episode was building up to a big thing, and there's all these like quick little cutaways to what we saw the Prophet character in episode 2. Who, if I've not made that clear, it's the guy with the beard from episode 2 that Kirsten stabbed. That becomes clear in this episode if it wasn't already by the end of that last one. This big final crescendo is very impactful, especially since it intercuts with what seems like the moments that young Kirsten first lost Javine. That's a bit open-ended still as to what happened to him. He just kind of disappears. There's a conversation in the flashbacks earlier on where he's skinning wolves that he's like killed for food, right? Nothing cruel about it. It's just hunting for survival. Kirsten quotes the line from the comic book, which is, "To the monsters, we are the monsters." And he's like, what does that even mean? And she explains that, well, to these wolves, you're the monster. You've killed like this whole family of wolves. They're terrified of you, but you're also scared of the wolves. And I almost, like, I was thinking of that at the end when he seems to have went missing. I'm like, is the implication just subtly that he did get got by the wolves and that he in some way deserved because the wolves were rightfully scared of him? I don't know. I mean, I'm probably reading into that too much because Kirsten certainly still, I think, hopes that he's out there somewhere, although obviously she has abandonment issues and doesn't like the idea of anyone abandon her, which is why any idea that Alex wants to leave the troop is something that she gets really upset about, and that's something that comes up again in this episode. I will say I did find Alex as a character a little bit frustrating this episode, just because I get the point of her character. I get that she is the young character who could be influenced by the Prophet and in a way already has been. And this idea of the generation that have grown up after the apocalypse, what did it, they don't have a name for them, but they I think they started calling the older people, and by older, just anyone who's Kirsten's age and up, effectively, are referred to as the pre-pans. I think they were calling them. It's this idea that they're stuck in their ways because they remember the time before, but this young generation should be able to move on and do their own thing. And sometimes from the character of Alex, all I really got the impression of is that it's not like she's got a solid idea of what the way forward should be. It's just about doing something to rebel and be different from the oldies. That, oh, I'm different, and all you oldies are dragging us all down with all your memories and rules of the world that came before. So I want to be different. I want to run off, and she does run off on a horse towards the end of the episode. Even after Kirsten tells her she stabbed the guy that she wanted to run away with briefly before. The character's a little frustrating just because she's aggressively like one note in what she represents, and it never felt like they gave me a justifiable reason other than she's young and wants to rebel as to why she is kind of rebelling against the characters around her. And you can argue, I think, that Kirsten's being a little coddling, of course. Like, I think that'd be a fair thing to maybe argue with what I just said. But I found it hard to kind of like understand her completely to a point where I don't get annoyed at the decision she's making. It feels like she sort of ping-pongs a little bit where she seems okay with Kirsten after the performance, even though the moment in the performance where they yell during Hamlet, like, or the remade version of Hamlet, the recalibrated version of Hamlet, because Tobias was saying how much he hates Hamlet, so they say, oh no, we can shake it up, we're going to do a new interpretation of Hamlet, and it's got new dialogue and all that. But there's a moment in the play where it does seem like it gets quite heated. Like, it's not really them acting, they're just actually mad at each other, because they've had this confrontation right before about Kirsten being really overly protective and always taking weapons when she's like going on stage to perform, and not letting Alex just go and do what she wants. And Alex confessed that she did want to leave with the Prophet and she was going to take him up on it, but she just wanted it that day. But of course, as I said, Kirsten has kind of big abandonment issues, right? She felt abandoned by her parents, even though that wasn't necessarily their choice, of course, in the moment. She feels abandoned by Javan. Like, all of this is something that they've been sort of hitting at since this character was introduced. And here, now that she's the older one, you get this sense of, even though she's not actually a parent, she kind of is acting like a parent. You know, she's acting like a parent who grew up when she was a kid feeling a certain way about all the things she didn't have, and is almost forcing it too much on this younger character in her life. So I think it makes sense from that point of view, like from that side of the story. Uh, I think just Alex is sort of yelling and rebelling and wanting to run away and getting mad at Kirsten is just a little bit grating and frustrating at times, just because it is kind of simple in one note. Like it's not a big deal. It's just, but it is something that was kind of sticking out to me a little bit in this episode, to the point where I thought she was going to die. I thought when she was riding the horse out at the end, she was going to hit a mine. I thought she was going to blow up, and it was going to be the whole big thing. That was going to be the big climax of the episode, is that she, through her own stupidity, got herself killed because she's too reckless. Because she ran through the mines earlier on, she's doing it again here towards the end, which is a perfect symbolism, of course, for the fact that she is careless, that she is not really accepting the danger that's all around her in the world. That's what Kirsten keeps trying to tell her, is that the world is still dangerous and you still have to be careful. You know, right at the start of the episode, when Daddy Mars comes in his bike to invite them once again to the Museum of Human History, or whatever he was calling his group, the way that scene starts is that as soon as someone notices him riding in, they all start yelling stranger, so they're all alert. Like, everyone in the group is alert that there's a stranger around. So there is still this idea of, like, people out in the wasteland, if you want to call it that. I mean, to be fair, unlike other post-apocalyptic stories, the Earth itself hasn't went to shit. Like, it's still flourishing in terms of, you know, there's still water, there's still greenery, there's still life to hunt, things like that. There's, you know, this was a pandemic that just took out most of the humans, seemingly. And possibly some of the animals. I don't know if they specified that back in episode 1. It's been a long time since I watched episode 1. But clearly there's still wolves to hunt, so it seems like there's at least enough compared to the amount of humans that are left. Yeah, I mean, I think they're setting up that idea, right? And then this episode pays that off by having not only the Prophet live up to his threat, but even this idea that this group in this country club are scared to leave and even look for the kids that were kidnapped, because they just don't think they can cope out there with all the dangerous people around. Like, they're scared of him coming back. That's why they put the mines back out. They talk about how he showed up with a crutch to try and gain some sympathy, and Kirsten says that, you know, that she was suspicious of that as well. That's how you gain trust, as you look weaker. There's a famous thriller, which actually did get remade into an American movie as well, but it's the original Swedish, I want to say, called The Vanishing. And that movie really get into the whole idea of, like, someone who was trying to kidnap someone gain some trust by looking weaker, by looking like they had an injury. And that's kind of like this similar tactic that seems to be getting used here with the Prophet character. So this idea that he's stealing children or converting children to be like a follower, and that the youth of this world are being weaponized and turned into extremists, is an interesting idea. Obviously, I don't know too much about the Prophet as a character yet, or what he believes in, to really get to the root of why he's doing this, or why he believes so much that all of the people who were alive before the fall, before the pandemic, why they should, because it sounds like he just wants to kill them all off. Like, they're holding us back, right? We can't flourish in this new world until all the olds are gone, because we're thinking too much like them. They're forcing all of their ancient beliefs from before on us. And I think, if nothing else, like, that feels like it just applies to every generation, or every 2 generations in the real world. Like, this idea that the younger generation have ideas of how to be progressive and move things forward, and the older generation reject it because it sounds radical to them. And on some level, it feels like that's always an ongoing debate, no matter what time period we're in, is the younger generation's always thinking in new ways that the older generation weren't. This is obviously taking it a couple of steps further, where, like, this younger generation are being more weaponized against the older generation, which is an interesting place to take it. To go back to Kirsten, though, I should point out that the quick snippet we got at the end of episode 1 with her in the comic book was actually from this episode. That was like a sort of flash forward, because she didn't have the comic book on her person during the last couple of episodes. This was something that she had hidden at this country club, and I suspect, actually, despite whatever I said earlier and whatever the excuse seemed to be, for making Sarah come here, it seems like the real reason she wanted to come here was to see her book again, because she had hid it at this country club. It's like hidden amongst a bunch of golf balls under a desk. And she gets it back, and then we see the scene of her reading it again. And it's it's old, it's beat up, it's barely holding together, it's stained because it's a book that's been around for 20 years at this point. But I think that's also motivated by the fact that she has heard some of these things come from the prophet's mouth that feel like they became from her book, and she doesn't understand that because there's only one copy and she hid it. We know there's more than one copy because of the last episode, but she doesn't know that. And it's like she's almost wanting to check it again and try and figure out what's happening and what's going on. We do get a little bit of like what the story is in the book, that it's an astronaut who at the start of the story is stranded in space but makes it onto a derelict space station, I think is what it said. And there's a whole thing about the young people on the space station want to like leave and go and start like a new on the Earth, I think it was, or maybe somewhere else, somewhere new. But it definitely felt like, oh, like I can see some parallels here with what the prophet's doing with the younger generation. Someone seems to have taken Station 11 as some kind of Bible and is trying to enact it through. So, like, there's definitely some stuff there. I definitely need more, though, to kind of really sink my teeth into that, but it feels like it's touching on that kind of thing. As far as other stuff goes in this episode, it is interesting getting some other characters. The scene at the dinner table with the passive-aggressive back and forth. Again, another dinner table scene with passive-aggressive dialogue. It's funny how we've had that a couple episodes in a row. But I think Gil, which is, Tobias from Arrested Development, it is interesting that right before the explosion at the end, when he tries to sort of like talk to the kids and they run up and hug him, which sets off the mines, it does seem like he's writing a letter to Catherine, which maybe suggests that when he had the conversations earlier in the episode between him and Kirsten and him and Sarah, where he does show some remorse for leaving. And the conversation with Sarah does feel like he is content with the choice he made. And even though they both love all the art they made together, there's obviously regret that he's not there anymore. He doesn't say anything about wanting to go back, even though Kirsten and the other scene try to convince him to. But at the end of the episode, before the kids show up, he is writing a letter that's addressed to Catherine, which maybe suggests that he was maybe making a decision here, where he was choosing to leave. He did say to Kirsten that he wanted to be here, but it wasn't the most convincing delivery of that line, and a very intentional part on the of the actor. To sell that he's conflicted about it, and that maybe he does have regrets, and it ties back into that line from the book again, which is, I don't want to live the wrong life and then die, and that comes back up again with Kirsten, and we see her as a kid looking out the window and seeing the astronaut in front of her, which again I think is just in her head, or maybe that that's how she sees Javan, because there's an interesting line actually when they're arguing about whether or not it's safe to go out, and he's basically saying something about the book, but when she mentions the character from the book, Javan says, "I played him," and I don't know if he's speaking in a sort of like he knows what the story of the book is because he's probably read it with her a bunch of times, and he's comparing what his role in her life is to that of the astronaut, or if he's being more literal. And at some point, because the reference also put like it staying for a play before they left the apartment, I do wonder if like they literally acted out the book in the apartment, maybe for his brother who was perhaps dying, and that's why the brother didn't come with them, but they put on this show for him before they left. Something that she maybe wanted to do, and it maybe sets up again this idea thematically that she's always sought comfort in performing in the darkest of times, that there's something about that just helps her. I don't know. I don't really have any answers for this, but those lines really stuck out to me as feeling a bit like weird. Like, oh, there's something to that, and I don't really quite know what it is as of yet. The chemistry between some of the actors here, like Sarah and Gil, when they have their moment reminiscing, and she clearly regrets him leaving and didn't want him to leave, and is still kind of bitter about it. I think the chemistry there feels pretty good. It feels right between the performers. There's this running thing in this episode where it's actually Daddy Mars at the start of the episode who brings in her old CD recording and she keeps it away from him. In fact, that's a CD that Alex throws at Kirsten during the Hamlet play and almost hits her in the head. But they're talking about this, her and Gil, about how she hates that recording in their heart-to-heart scene. And he's like, wait, why? Why do you hate it? And she says, oh, I recorded that a few weeks before my dad passed away. And it kind of feels like I'm trying to relive a moment that, you know, was there, it happened, and it went away. And trying to capture that in a recording just feels... I can't remember the exact line she says, but it kind of felt like, in a weird way, it kind of sums up what these people are doing with their entire life right now, is they're trying to keep alive something that existed before, in the before times, and they're still trying to make sure it exists in some form forever. And maybe they are delusional to try and hold on to it. Maybe they are. But at the same time, of course, one of the messages of the show might be about, you know, finding those things that give us happiness and comfort, even in the darkest of times. So, like, maybe it's going to give me equal amounts of both opposing views, and that'll be part of the story as it goes forward. I'm not sure. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about with this episode. I don't think I like this one as much as the last episode. I think the last one was so much more focused, and I think had a clear, definitive character study of an episode. This has little bits of character study for Kirsten, of course, and then even a little bit for some of the side characters, but it didn't have me kind of enraptured the same way that the last episode did. Like, I found the story of the person who wrote the book and everything went into that was a bit more of a tighter story to me than this one. But the ending is big, and I'm curious to see where we go now that we've really established the threat of this villain character that we're dealing with. But yeah, so that is my thoughts on episode 4. This is twice a month, so I'll see you in a couple of weeks for episode 5. But let me know what you thought of episode 4 of Station 11 in the comments. I always appreciate any thoughts, and of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble and help keep all the reviews coming. I wouldn't be able to do this without all the support over there. So thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?